Well, thanks for being here with us today. And I really appreciate your time. I think you've got really good, valuable information that I know our clients will definitely benefit from. But can you just tell us a little bit about you, about what you do, how you got into this field, and a little bit about your practice?
Sure, yeah. So I am a licensed professional counselor. So I do mental health counseling in the Atlanta area. My office is in Sandy Springs, and then I do virtual for anybody in Georgia or the state of Florida. So I focus primarily on working with parents. I love working with parents of young kids, but really I work with the full spectrum, anything that's parenting related or family oriented. And what brought me to that is just by working with kids for so many years and seeing the complexity of the dynamics of families and how when parents felt empowered to be able to do the work that their child needed, to be able to provide the environment that was helping their child grow, that those families progressed so much quicker in therapy. And so while I loved working with the kids, I felt so much more value in getting to work with the parents and getting to show them that, hey, they can do this. It doesn't just take a professional therapist being able to work with their child 1 hour a week. They have so much potential to be able to play a really impactful role in their family.
That's awesome. I think it's interesting because a lot of the times when people are going through whether it's a divorce or
Mhm.
just they were in a relationship and had a child and split up, the go-to a lot of the times I need to get counseling for my child, right?
Always. Yep.
Hey, our family is splitting up. We need to get counseling. But they really forget that so much of the health in the house comes
Yes.
from them. And
Yeah.
they're,
No, they deserve that care too.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so even for us, we're guilty of it, of saying like, hey, you need to get your children in counseling.
Yep.
And you forget that the parents' needs are just as important.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And it is such a trickle down effect. Everybody, we want the child in therapy too. Yes. But there's so much benefit when the parent has a space to be able to release some of this transition also.
What advice would you give to a parent who is maybe interested in pursuing co-parent counseling and trying to convince their spouse or partner to get on board? What
Right.
advice would you have for somebody in that situation? Because we see that
Yeah.
all the time.
I bet. Yeah. So the beautiful thing about co-parenting therapy is that it can look a lot of different ways. So I think that's the first step is really trying to push past those myths or those preconceived notions or those assumptions of, we're just going to argue the whole time or they're going to take sides. The therapist is going to, take whoever's side made the first call or anything like that, and really pushing past that and having an open mind of the goal is just getting on the same page. The goal is creating clarity around what does our new family look like. It looks different. There's a transition, there's moving pieces. And so as far as getting another person on board, I would be open. I would be clear about why it's important to you, what you think the value is, making it less about, hey, we're having problems or you never agree with me, so we have to go do this, and more, hey, I think this would be a really great resource for us. I think this would be a really helpful thing for us to be able to support our kids better. Looking at what are the benefits of it, not just what are the stressors that are causing us to go there.
Yeah, I think it's hard because so often we always think that we're right and the other person is the
Of
problem,
course.
right? So most people think, well, we need to go see a co-parenting counselor or because you need help,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Go as the other person.
Yeah. And so but it's important just to start to bridge that gap wherever it is,
Yeah.
whether it's you have someone who, sometimes it's an inability just to communicate
Yeah.
about what activities the child, like it could be very simple things.
Yeah. There's such a spectrum.
Yeah. And then the other party feels completely left out and then they're cold or, isolated. And so there's problems on both sides.
Mhm.
How do you get to the root of that? Like, what does that look like for a family that's going to come in and see you and they say, we're having these problems. Do you meet with each of them individually first? Do you just plop them on a couch and start asking questions? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so it definitely depends on what the history is. So if there is something that is really pressing, whether it's a crisis or a really specific event that's bringing them in, then we'll start with that. So that way, because we want to see some wins, we want to get some traction, start to see, okay, some of this dust is settling. before we're really able to dive into what some of those core issues are. And so if they're coming in with something specific, then yes, in a perfect world, I'd plop them both down on the couch behind me and let's just get things moving and at least get to a place where we can agree on a first step. And then we have the capacity to, okay, let's start talking about some of this history. Some of the things that are coming up for each of you guys in these interactions. So in some cases, I will meet individually one-on-one just to hear both sides of the story. But after that, if it's a co-parenting situation, we're always together. There's no secrets. There's no getting information from one and not sharing with the other. We try to keep as open of a loop of communication as possible.
So what would be the process? Because we see this all the time.
Yeah.
People have been through this and they've gone through litigation and they are really, truly at a place in their relationship where they can't be in the same room together. And by some miracle, those two people get in to see you for co-parent counseling. Great. And they can't be in a room together. If that's our starting point, how do we really
make progress?
I mean, they're not going to
room. Yeah.
We say, hey, you have to go sit in a room together. Yeah. What do we do with folks that are in that place?
Yeah. So the first thing that jumps to my head is the value of virtual therapy now that we've had COVID and we all are super familiar with that. So that can be a great way to ease it in, especially if someone's feeling particularly fearful or nervous about maybe being ganged up on and kind of going back to those myths of what is this going to look like. So virtual therapy can be great because me and both parties can log on all from 3 separate computers just to do a general getting to know the process, talking about what the expectations are, and setting rules and boundaries before anybody enters into the office. I think another really important thing about working with a therapist in this space is that they are someone that can be direct and can hold those boundaries, because when things get really revved up quickly, everybody needs to feel like the environment is going to stay safe for them. And so it's important that it's with a therapist that is able to maintain those boundaries, able to hold those rules in place just to keep everybody safe.
Yeah. And, something that I think of coming up on the summer that comes up really during the fall is a lot of parents are making decisions about where to enroll their children.
Yes.
A hot debate because people are passionate about their child's education. And, one party might think, well, I'm making the decision for my kid. And the other party thinks, well, you want that decision for you out of convenience, right? And so it turns into this massive problem because, you think it's a life or death, you're like, this is the child, right?
Yeah.
So how do you suggest that people start to get on the same page or at least have a calm conversation about what they want for education for their children?
Yeah, the thing that I would start with is just the idea of listening to understand, which is much easier said than done. But as your other partner is telling you about what they're wanting, really challenging yourself to try to hear what the core of their message is without letting those assumptions, which typically come from a history, of course, because there is history there, especially if there's a history of distrust, then it's really hard to trust that somebody has those pure core values in their communication, that it is in the best interest of the child and not having selfish motivation. And so really trying to listen to understand. It can be helpful to write things out. That way there is a lot of clarity. It's going to be harder to say, well, you said XYZ if it was never written down or nobody ever has any type of tangible clarity around what each party actually is communicating. The other thing is, depending on the child's age, is children can have choice sometimes in what is best for them, as far as, is it about the commute? Is it a child that has a really hard time being in the car for a long amount of time? And so we should be considering that in their education. Is it someone that has a really hard time transitioning different days at homes and things like that? So there's a lot more to take in than just the school. And I think that that's the important part, is looking at this systemic approach of there's so many different factors to one decision, but all of those factors, they're going to come into play with every decision. So that's why it's important that we have the space to talk about these factors of what are our child's needs.
Are there cases, and I'm sure there probably are, where you would not recommend co-parent counseling? We see this all the time where folks come in and they may say, well, there's a history of domestic violence, or the person, has a personality disorder and it's, always an issue.
Exactly.
where would you kind of draw the line and say, you know what, this isn't probably going to be a healthy way for you to work on these issues, maybe by individual instead of co-parent?
Yeah. So that first example that you just gave. So if there is a history of domestic violence, then that is something to be really cautious about, as far as especially doing in-person therapy, of entering into this office is fairly small in all things considered. And so that can feel really unsafe to be in an enclosed space with someone that has harmed you in the past. Another thing is, I like how you mentioned personality disorders, any type of intense mental health complications. I would just, in order for me to work with them, and I would imagine most people would feel this way, is you would just want them to also be in individual therapy, to also know that they're having their own mental health issues addressed on a one-on-one basis. Because when I'm working with a parenting client, that parenting relationship is my client, not the individuals. And so I'm not going to be able to address the alcoholism and all these different little individual pieces if our core and what we're really trying to focus on is the parenting piece. And so we do want to address and really tend to some of those more pre-existing factors, if you will, and make sure that those are in a healthy place before we're even able to sit in the same room and talk about what's best for our kids.
Something that I see that comes up and that is a valid point is whether it's a divorce, sometimes in relationships, people assume roles. So say it's a divorce and you have a husband and a wife, and the husband has been working and traveling, and the mom has been the homemaker, and she's really the one responsible for the kids. And that worked when they were married. Those were the roles they assumed, that's fine. Or a very similar situation, the people were together, they were not married, and the mom has really been the parent, the only parent involved. And then all of a sudden dad comes, in the picture, or they're getting a divorce and he wants to be involved. That struggle of the control, because it's always been that way, and the lack of trust of the other person's ability, because it's always been that way. How do you address people really, number one, trusting that the other party actually wants to be involved, but giving them that leeway to be involved in some form or fashion, and kind of releasing a little bit of that control?
Yeah, they're talking about such a huge identity shift in both of those examples of this identity of either not working and now having to work and relying on the other parent to play more of a parenting role that maybe they weren't before. I think the biggest thing, and I know I keep using this word, is clarity, is having really clear expectations of what is a safe parent. Now, I use the word safe really intentionally because, it's a safe parent doesn't necessarily dress your kids always in matching clothes and clean hair and all of these things that maybe we're used to, or that we feel like we value as a parent, or whatever it might be. Those are silly examples, but really having that base level of, okay, what are my expectations of when I know that my child is at least being cared for in an adequate way that is safe. And so being really clear about those things and having markers or checkpoints of, okay, if these things aren't happening, then what can I do? Because I can't control what's happening in the other home. I'm not there. I can't control it. I might hear some feedback from my child or from somebody else, and I've got to decide, okay, what's my plan of action when I hear that feedback? That's why having a therapist is a wonderful resource, so that you have a space to be able to process this transition. But again, knowing, okay, what are the clear expectations of how we both agree is the best way to keep our children safe, and trusting that that partner is going to do that. And that if not, then knowing that next level of, okay, whether that's coming back to you guys and talking about different custody things. But it's hard to trust, especially when there is most often a really deep history.
Yeah. And a lot of time you just have two totally different people. Like you have a scheduled, structured person who, right, has the kids eating at 5:30 and by 8, like they've done that their whole lives. And then they really, it's panic to them to think, I'm going to have to give my child to this other person that might not feed them at 5:30. Like they might eat at 7. And that seems so silly, but to them, it's a huge,
it's going to throw everything off.
Yeah, it's a huge,
and then they feel the repercussions of that when the child comes back into their home. So that is, it's a really tricky thing to navigate. And it is kind of keeping in this clear perspective of, okay, we are both working for the best interest of our child. And so that might look like two different routines at two different homes right now, until we're able to get to a place where we can have conversations about how do we sync these things up a little bit more.
Do you ever work with third parties and parents? In other words, we have cases all the time where, let's say, a grandparent was granted custody.
Yeah.
There may be a safety plan. There may have been something going on in the past, and that parent is rebuilding, or maybe they were gone for whatever reason, and they're coming back into the picture, or working to that
Yep.
to come back into the picture. And obviously, they're not co-parents, but it is very similar. And it is similar in a lot of the ways of having a deep history, because if it's a, parent-child relationship, or a mother-in-law and, son or daughter-in-law relationship, it can be very touchy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I am pro the more the merrier. The more bodies in the room, or the more faces on the screen, the better, because if you are playing a role as a caregiver in this child's life, whether you're a primary caregiver or a grandparent who is playing an active role or whatever it might be, it's important that you have a voice in the process. I think that's really huge, that you feel like you have a voice in this, but also that you're in the loop on everything, that you're aware of what changes are happening, that everybody's able to have that communication together. So yeah, if it's a 2-parent home and then there's a third caregiver or a third family member that is really invested in the process and they want to join in on learning what is this co-parenting thing, what does it look like for all of us to be a well-oiled machine one day, then yes, the more the merrier.
Oh, we're laughing. we're in our conference room, and we've got these windows, and this window washer just like
oh no way.
water, and he's like scrubbing
like a movie.
We're like,
it's a little distracting. Sorry.
Yeah.
Like, can you tell him to stop doing that right now in front of us?
Right.
So we have a question from someone, and she says, how do you communicate with a parent who wants no communication at all?
Mm-hmm.
As in they refuse to speak with you and they only speak through the child.
Okay, so speaking through the child is a boundary that we want to try to set. And so if this is someone who is, I don't know the extent of refusing to speak without knowing more details, but let's say that they will maybe agree to written communication, something like that, that maybe a notebook can go in the child's backpack, and there's rules that there's no opinions being given in the notebook. It's a facts only notebook is usually what I'll call it. Here's what I'm needing, facts only. We're trying to remove any type of judgment from the written communication, because then that can get tricky. So I want to push you to keep trying for communication, but also to recognize what you can and can't control. If this is someone who's refusing from every angle to have those conversations with you, then really releasing yourself from that of, I'm doing everything that I can. So now what can I do in my home to parent my child in a way that is consistent and safe, and providing them a good foundation for emotional health, for healing from whatever this transition is. There comes a point when we can't force, especially an adult, to engage in this process without at least a little bit of buy-in. We don't have to have a ton of buy-in. I've seen parents come a long way from not wanting to participate at first, and then starting the process, and mountains really moving around what their expectations were. But I would encourage this person to try a different couple types of communication, but really do everything we can to avoid going through the child as much as possible.
Yeah, we see that a lot. Sometimes people will even, give the child support check to the kid to take to the other parent. And obviously we discourage our clients and tell them, like, we do not allow that. Like, that is not something that you should do. But I think that kind of leads into a really good point, is that kids are so smart.
They're so smart.
And, people will, you'd be surprised. Like, they'll call one of us and say, oh, my kid said this. Like, they only know that if the parent told them that directly. And it's like, that's not necessarily the case. Like, they are sponges. Mm-hmm. So how do you've talked a little bit about boundaries, but do you have any just like quick things that come to mind of boundaries that you usually try to tell people, hey, like, these are good ones to set, or kind of go-to things that you should or should not be doing if you're in two separate households?
Yeah, so to go back to facts only, that's kind of my base level, is facts only. And so we're only communicating things like, did you leave that at mom's house? Or, did you happen to get this from dad's house, or something like that? And then if there's if you feel any type of judgment value is what I would call it, which is anything negative or positive, is to screen that through before we say it. So remembering that no matter what the history is, to that child, this is mom, or this is dad, or this is grandma, or whatever it is, that they are an important adult in their life, regardless of the way that they hurt us, regardless of the history there, regardless of kind of the events that might have caused some of this to unfold, is really, I think, zooming out and remembering that that's this child's mom, dad, whatever it is. And so we want to guard that relationship for them. We want that to be their dad or their mom, without having to be, oh, this is someone that mom doesn't like. This is someone that my dad doesn't like. And so trying to remove those judgments as much as possible, which means having an outlet for that, because it would be completely unnatural or inauthentic for me to expect you to just not feel those things, to not feel angry at this person, or to not feel resentment, or to not feel frustration. And so having an outlet, whether it's a friend or another family member or a therapist, or a place where you get to still process a lot of these emotions that you feel, but in front of your child or in front of their ears, it's just facts only or positives only.
Yeah. And I think that a thing that I would say is exactly what you said, is only the facts that are necessary, right? So there are facts that you don't want your children to
Of
know.
course.
Yep. And, we'll have people come in and they're like, oh, my 6 or 7, 8-year-old know that the other party had an affair. It's like, well, they only know that they had an affair because they've heard y'all arguing about it or talking about it. But that's not something that they should know or that they should be involved in.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, kids are dragged into the middle of a situation all the time.
Yeah. Age appropriate information is so important. And also I would add answering honestly. So if your kids are asking you questions, I would always encourage honesty, but at an age appropriate level. So that means they don't have to know, the word affair or who it was with or where it happened, things like that. But we can give answers that are still honest. Because like you were saying, Jenni, they're listening, they're absorbing, they know mom and mom or mom and dad or whoever it is don't like each other right now. They can feel that, and that's okay. So we want to be honest about that so that there's not a lot of confusion for them of they're telling me everything's fine and then I'm seeing them cry, after I go to sleep or whatever it is. That can be really confusing for a child.
So how would you recommend difficulty in, let's say the parenting relationships are okay, and then we get a new spouse or a new boyfriend or
families,
which adds another layer.
Of course.
And I often hear, we talked about the child as a conduit, but I also often have cases where folks come in and they say, my co-parent won't co-parent with me. I have to now speak to their spouse or their girlfriend, and that's a real frustration for folks. What would you recommend if you're being, kind of shut out by the other parent and sort of now forced to communicate with someone that doesn't have a full understanding and isn't really in a parenting role yet, if it's
that can get really complicated really fast. So of course, in a perfect world, we would start with the co-parenting with the primary caregivers. So if we're able to do that and we're able to lay that foundation as early as possible so that if and when other partners come into the mix, there's already clarity around what are our expectations, when do we introduce kids to new partners, how do we talk about them, what do they call them, things that can be really triggering if they're not talked about beforehand. But if we're in a situation where we are being shut out, where we're only being able to communicate, kind of like I said to that other person's question, we could try some different types of communication. If written communication, if group communication, maybe they feel like they need their new partner on the call with them because maybe they feel like they need some support in that or whatever it might be. We have to get creative sometimes for the sake of the child, for the sake of opening up those lines of communications. That might not be the easiest thing all the time, but it does take creativity and commitment to be able to open those lines up as much as we can.
Yeah, I think something that we see a lot is where, there's even passing like the schedule in between a child. It might be a 10-year-old and they're expecting the 10-year-old to tell the other parent about their soccer schedule or whatever. And, then one parent has the position of like, well, you could go get it just like I can get it. And the other one has the position of, well, you already have it. Why can't you just send it to me?
Yeah.
They get stuck in their two positions.
Yeah.
I'm not married to you anymore, because I'm not going to continue to baby you, right? I'm not going to continue to just give you a schedule. But then the other parent thinks that they're just being ugly because you already have the schedule and you're just holding it because you want my life to be difficult.
Yeah.
So how do you, like, one person's going to have to.
Right. We need the schedule. Right.
So we need the schedule. So how do you bridge that in maybe each feeling like they've gained something, maybe freedom for one and responsibility for them, whatever it is, but how do you get over those type of things?
Yeah, I'm thinking about even just the past questions that you guys have asked about this idea of listening to understand, which of course is always easier said than done, and having clarity around what those expectations are. So if this is a family that's in co-parenting therapy, which would be ideal and really wonderful, then this would be a great space to talk about those things. Let's have each person kind of express, I feel like I'm having to baby them, or they're not able to do this on their own, or I feel like they're just trying to drive me crazy. Why is it so hard to just send the email with the schedule, or things like that, where both people can be heard and there's someone there that is able to mediate that process of reflecting back. Okay, both of these feelings around this are really valid, and we've got to figure out a way to get this schedule to both of you. And so really boots on the ground, tangible ways to solve these problems. So of course, my answer is, co-parenting therapy would be great for that. But if we're not in that space, then what is a solution that works for everybody? Is there a solution that works for everybody? How do we get down to those core values? Kind of like I was saying when talking about education decisions, of what are the things that at the end of the day, we do agree on, whether that's, okay, we agree that what we're doing right now isn't working. And so, okay, that's a great sign that co-parenting therapy, or just therapy in general, would be helpful. As if the only thing we can agree on is that it's not working. That's still something you agree on. That's still something we can work with. And so thinking about, okay, what do we agree on? We agree that, our child having a schedule is important. We agree that each of us knowing the schedule is important. Okay, great. So now how do we need to reach that goal? What systems do we need in place in order to help that happen?
If someone wants to come and see you and say the other parent's not quite at a place where they, where they're going to participate voluntarily. But say one parent wants to, and then after a few months or a few weeks, then the other parent says, okay, I'll try this co-parenting counseling. Is that something that you could still do, or would you be then at that point like conflicted out of doing that because you've been seeing one party? How would that work?
Yeah. So in that exact example, I would probably try to find somebody else to do the co-parenting therapy if I already have a strong relationship with one of the members of the family. The other option is if I'm working, let's say, with mom on really specific things and dad agrees to talk about one specific subject, we could bring him in for what we would call a collateral session, where mom is still my client, but he is agreeing to come in and work with us on this one thing. So now if we're wanting to go into a whole co-parenting process, that's where I would probably refer to a different therapist so that mom and I could maintain that therapeutic relationship.
Got it.
I really like what you said about when people come for the co-parenting counseling, is that you're really representing the relationship, not one or the other, because so often people go see someone just for that person to take their side to fix the other person.
They get disappointed very quickly.
They get to talk to someone so you can fix them. But I like that. Look, my job is to try to make this relationship better. It's not really to say you're in the right or you're in the wrong, or vice versa.
Yeah. So I have a question. Earlier in the discussion, we were kind of talking about, honoring if the child expresses a wish, honoring that where you can, and then parents using the child as a conduit. Yeah. And one of the things that we see, I think, as litigators, you often see where that's gone way too far, where a child has been given too much authority and power in the relationship. And now it gets to a place once they're a teenager or even a tween, where that gets just out of control.
Yeah.
How would you recommend, and I know this is super general because you don't have the specifics, but where do you walk that line of honoring your child's wishes, advocating for what your child is saying they want versus, walking into that danger zone of putting a child in a power position that they can't handle.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer in terms of the healthiest aspect, or the most ideal, if you will. And so we want to hear what the child wants. We always do. We want the child to know that they have a voice, and we want the child to be a child, which means not making decisions that are parent decisions. And something that's really healthy for a child to have modeled is what it looks like to be a child with a parent that makes decisions. Now, whether they're 3 or 13, there's always pushback to when the parent makes the final decision. But my encouragement is always, we want to get through that pushback, because at the end of the day, we're actually modeling a really healthy relationship that they need to understand or have a concept of. And so I say that because a really great rhythm to get in is to get feedback and to let the child know that you're going to talk with your other partner, with their other parent. And then you guys will get back to them once you guys have a decision on the same page. And so if the child says, what I've seen some is wanting changes in the days that we're going to mom or dad's house. And so if a child says, I really want to go with mom on the weekends, instead of having that knee-jerk reaction of, no, it's my days, things like that, where you're feeling really guarded and protected of this decision of, thank you for the feedback. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to talk to mom, and then we'll let you know. And the decision might be no, and that's okay. But we want the child to feel heard. We want the child to be able to, when they have these opinions and preferences, to know that their voice matters in this, that they're not just a pawn getting mixed up in the chaos of all of this transition. And so I think it's hearing it out. It's not responding immediately, fighting every urge that you have to just take a deep breath, say, thank you so much. I'm so glad that you shared that with me. And I'm going to take a few minutes or a day, and I'll let you know tomorrow, or whatever it is.
Yeah. And you were saying something, and it made me just think about the schedule. So do you ever work with people who aren't yet in 2 separate houses, but they know that is, coming? Say they have filed for divorce, and they're, trying to work on a parenting plan, for example, and they're trying to figure out their the day-to-day schedule. Is that something that you ever work with to try to figure out what are we going to agree to moving forward with a schedule for the kids?
Yeah, I would say it depends on how much conflict there is. So if we are in a place where we're going to need some pretty extensive conflict resolution help in order to get there, then probably not. I think they're probably going to need something more court ordered in that instance of really being able to dive into the details and have accountability to the details. I think that's the biggest piece. Is it's easy to at first say, yeah, 50% or whatever it is. And, we'll just alternate with whatever works. And then as things unfold, as the divorce unfolds, or as life changes, we talk about new partners being brought in, then all of a sudden there's less accountability to what they first agreed on. And so I'm very detail oriented and direct in nature. And so I like being able to do the nitty gritty and being able to tease out what the differences are and what each person is needing. But if that is already saturated in such a level of distrust or resentment, then it's probably going to need a higher level of care at that point.
Yeah, I think that, studies have shown that people who can come to an agreement on their own are so much happier with the agreement. And so obviously,
makes sense, right?
Yeah, we advocate for our clients. We certainly, fight for what we think is the best interest of the children, but we also encourage our clients to talk to the other parent. But so often they, you might have somebody say, well, we've been married, we want one party just wants 50-50, and they really haven't thought even through what that means or what that looks like. Mm-hmm. And the other party, it might have been thinking about it for years and is like, absolutely not, like, this is what we're going to do. And they have a very different picture. But then it ends up just 2 attorneys arguing over days, right? So then we're negotiating really days and hours of a month, and no one is really sitting down and talking to them on either side about, okay, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? What does that look like? And the ability to have them in the same room to talk about that in a healthy environment could be very valuable for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you have any other questions?
Gosh. The only other thing that I can think, because we get this question all the time, and it's, again, somebody that is already dug into a situation where there's not a healthy co-parent relationship. How do you navigate a child who is getting way too much information on one side and still maintain allowing the child to be a child when they've already gotten so much adult information? There is a natural desire to respond and defend yourself from time to time. If somebody's saying, oh, your mom had an affair and she's a terrible person and she did all these things, and you're like, well, that's just not true, number one. And number two, the other person had an affair. Obviously, that's not the conversation to have with your child.
Right.
But it's,
right,
I think,
but how do you navigate like the defense part of that, and even also like the correction part of that, versus trying to just say, honey, that's not appropriate to talk to you about, and you're really thinking like you're being lied to. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. So initially, as you were talking about that, Tracy, I was thinking it depends on the age of the child, but then really, does it? Does any child at any age deserve to have to carry that much weight about someone that's a parent figure in their life? No. So yes, age does matter because there's a level of age appropriateness. What a 13-year-old can take in about the history of their parents' relationship is very different than what a 3-year-old can take in, of course. So my right answer is to get your child in therapy, of course, if we can. Now, typically, depending on the custody situation, you need both parents' signature unless there's something, all of that. And so that can be tricky also. What if both parents don't agree that the child should be in therapy? But to get more specific to your question is, I would validate what they heard. That must be really concerning for you to hear that. I'm really sorry that information was shared with you. That's between me and your dad, or that's between me and your mom, and you don't need to worry about us. You don't need to worry about that. And so having as neutral of a response as possible and tuning into that defense in you, that's really valid too. And that's why you need a space to be able to feel heard in that, to be able to process everything that's going on, all of this transition and change, while still playing this neutral response to your child to not fuel this emotional baggage that's being put on them. Even just jumping in and saying, well, that's not true, actually, X, Y, Z. Well, now they're going to start questioning everything that parent ever said. And so it's creating an even bigger loop of confusion. And so depending on the age of the child, reminding yourself, it's not my job to prove myself to my child right now. This is history between me and their mom, or me and their dad. And my job is to assure my child that they're safe and that we are going to get through this, and that this is something that me and mom or dad are going to work on together. Now, if other partner won't work on that, whole other can of worms, of course.
Yeah. Is there, I guess this would be my last question. Something that comes up a lot in mediation is, we may agree to co-parenting. They agree that they're going to participate in co-parenting counseling. And then we start negotiating over how many sessions that they agree on. Okay. So we're like, okay, they started at 8 and we want 4. And then you're going back and forth. Is there an ideal number of sessions to really get to some useful ground, right? Like we don't really, it defeats the purpose if we say you're going to go to 2 sessions, and that's to like get your name and basic information about your kid.
Right.
What number as lawyers, or really as clients, should we be expecting as a minimum of, look, you've got to, if you're going to do it, you need to invest in X amount of sessions?
Yep. Yeah. So again, depends on the level of conflict, of course. So if this is a family that is coming in the door with fists already clenched and a whole list of things on their phone of what they want to complain about, then it's going to take weeks and weeks and weeks to kind of delve through all of that and to get to a place where we're actually able to make tangible change. Otherwise, I feel like 6 to 8 sessions is a good amount of time to be able to cover a variety of topics, to be able to hear both parties out, and to be able to create a plan and give it a little bit of time to get implemented. Because that can be the trickiest part, is kind of like you're saying, we sit in this room, it all sounds great, and then we go out into the real world and suddenly that's not working. And so we need time to be able to adapt and adjust and give feedback to what that plan is.
And do you give people, do they have homework or like practice?
I love homework.
Here, like try this for the next 2 weeks or whatever it may be.
Yeah. So I'm someone that loves homework, especially with parenting clients, as far as implementing these things. And I always say, if you can give this your all and truly implement the things that we're talking about, you're going to see progress and change. Now, if you're just signing on, 5 minutes before and you haven't thought about what we talked about the last week, it's going to be hard to get out of this rut. It really does take the day-to-day implementation. And something that I do with clients is email communication between sessions. And of course, there's boundaries and parameters, and I'm not doing full sessions via email, but having that open communication of, okay, we tried this today, it didn't work. Can we please talk about this next time? As opposed to you're holding all this for a whole week and then all of a sudden it's like word vomit when they come in.
And some of that kind of sounds like almost what we call parent coordination.
Yeah.
You feel like when you're in the co-parent counseling, you kind of take that role as well?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it takes that personality, that sort of mover, to be able to really move the ball forward.
Yeah, I mean, and especially if you're in a situation, and this is what we always tell our clients, look, you're in a situation that's not working.
It's not working. Yeah.
What's the harm in
trying something
else to see if it works? Because y'all are, like you said earlier, if your starting point is, we agree that this is not working, then at least we're agreed on that.
Yeah.
So I think that's so important to understand. Look, if that's your foundation, there's got to be movement.
Yeah.
Because it's highly unlikely you're going to have a person where it's like, no, our relationship's great.
Right. I think it's great.
Clearly it's not.
Yeah.
What we will do is I have your contact information. I'm going to share it on our information so that anybody who sees the video can reach out to you directly. How long is it if somebody says, hey, we need to get in, I would like to get a appointment scheduled? How far out are you typically scheduling, or how soon can you see people?
Yeah. So if it's an urgent need, I can usually make room the next week, typically, depending on their time flexibility. Now, if it's someone that has 1 hour that they're only available, then it could take a couple of weeks to a month to get in. But if they have flexibility and timing, then we can usually squeeze it in and at least get the ball moving to start the process.
And you're doing virtual and in person currently?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, that's great. That gives so much more flexibility for people.
Yes, it really does.
We always get, do you take insurance?
No, I do not. So I can provide a super bill for reimbursement. But yeah, I'm all private pay.
Okay. Got it.
Great.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It was so helpful. I think it'll be extremely helpful for our clients, and we're going to continue to push co-parenting counseling because I think it helps everyone. And at the end of the day, the kids, which are our future generations. So.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
All righty. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.